The needle of the analog vacuum gauge, a relic of Swiss precision from a defunct Geneva workshop, trembled with micro-oscillations, its finely honed tip hovering a scant millimeter from the red calibration mark denoting atmospheric breach. Inside the Class 10 positive pressure clean room of a nondescript pharmaceutical research facility north of Tel Aviv, the only sound was the near subsonic hum of the HEPA filtration system cycling 600 cubic feet of air per minute, and the rhythmic, metronomic hiss of a peristaltic nitrogen pump maintaining an inert atmosphere. Dr. Eris Thorne, a name meticulously constructed and backstopped by a non-existent academic history at Heidelberg and MIT, held his breath, a physiological response he had trained himself to ignore through years of painstaking discipline. His focus was absolute, centered on a single, perfectly spherical droplet of a clear, viscous fluid being extruded from the borosilicate glass tip of a computer-guided micropipette. The liquid, designated hexalipid toxin 7 or HLT7, was a marvel of biochemical malevolence, the culmination of 38 months of classified research. It elongated under its own weight, clinging to the needle with a surface tension that seemed to defy physics, a testament to its complex long-chain fatty acid structure before detaching with a silent, deliberate fall. It landed without a splash into the dark, velvety ganache center of a Belgian praline, specifically a Côte d'Or, Boucher. The chocolate did not react. There was no discoloration, no effervescence, no structural degradation. The ganache, a high-fat emulsion of cream and chocolate solids, simply wicked the lipid-based toxin into its matrix. A flawless, seamless delivery system for a weapon designed not to detonate, but to deconstruct a human being from the inside out, cell by agonizing mitochondrial cell. Thorne, his face a ghostly silhouette behind the polycarbonate shield of his sterile hood, glanced at the mission chronometer on the wall display. The process for this single, weaponized confection, from unsealing the foil to injection, microscopic resealing of the entry point with a color-matched chocolate polymer, and quality control imaging under a scanning electron microscope, had taken 17 minutes and 42 seconds. He had 23 more to prepare. The completed box, indistinguishable from one purchased off a shelf on the Grand Place in Brussels, had to be resealed, placed into a certified Belgian diplomatic pouch, and loaded onto a Royal Jordanian Airlines cargo flight to Amman by Oro 400 hours. The entire operation, codenamed Chocolate, a multi-million-dollar, multi-year endeavor spanning 3 continents, the culmination of thousands of hours of intelligence analysis and biochemical research, now hinged on his ability to perfectly replicate the heat-crimped factory seal on a cellophane wrapper. With a pair of titanium, non-magnetic tweezers, he picked up the next praline. Outside the lead-lined walls of the laboratory, the world slept. Inside, a master chemist was meticulously packaging a ghost, a slow-motion death sentence disguised as a luxury good. Thousands of miles away, in a heavily fortified villa in Baghdad's affluent Mansour district, the target Wadi Haddad was also sleeping. He was a man who trusted no one, a man whose paranoia was a tactical asset, not a weakness. He checked his food for poison, his car for bombs, his inner circle for traitors. His villa was swept for listening devices twice daily by a team of East German Stasi technicians. Yet he possessed a single, predictable indulgence, a physiological Achilles heel that Mossad was now banking the future of its counter-terrorism doctrine on. A cripplingly severe diabetic with an uncontrollable, psychologically ingrained craving for a specific Belgian chocolate. The clock on the walls was not counting down to an explosion. It was a deadline for a delivery. The critical choice wasn't about cutting a red or blue wire. It was about the precise application of a 1.2 millimeter heated nickel chromium blade to a polymer wrapper to simulate a factory seal. And the alarm that was about to be triggered wasn't a siren. It was the gradual, horrifying realization within the world's most feared terrorist organization that their untouchable leader was dying, and nobody, not even the best doctors in the Eastern Bloc, could understand why. It was clinically precise, psychologically brutal, and utterly deniable. It was the perfect Mossad operation. And it began here, in the silent hum of a secret lab, with a single, poisoned drop. Phase 1. The enemy. The file that landed with a soft thud on the uncluttered teak desk of Mossad director Yitzhak Hofi in late 1976 was thin. But its contents were heavy enough to bend geopolitical gravity. It was a post-action report on Operation Thunderbolt, the successful hostage rescue at Entebbe Airport. To the world, it was a stunning victory for Israel, a testament to the daring of its Sayeret Matkal commandos. To Hofi, a man who read victory and defeat in the margins of signals, intercepts, and the negative space of satellite photographs, it was a catastrophic failure of strategic imagination. The report, stripped of all celebratory language, detailed how a single man, operating from the relative safety of Baghdad, had managed to coordinate with German revolutionaries of the Revolutionaire Zelen, hijack an Air France airliner with 248 passengers, route it to Benghazi for refueling, then fly it to Idi Amin's Uganda, holding over 100 Israeli and Jewish citizens hostage and bringing the nation to its knees for a week. The architect of this global crisis, the subject of the file, was Dr. Wadi Haddad. The report was less a biography and more a charge sheet, a portrait of an enemy who had evolved beyond the traditional confines of warfare. Born 1927, Safed, British Mandate of Palestine, a Greek Orthodox Christian in a largely Muslim conflict, which gave him a unique outsider's perspective and an ability to build bridges to non-Arab radical groups. Educated as a physician at the American University of Beirut, a man trained to save lives who now dedicated his formidable intellect to taking them with clinical precision. He was the co-founder of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. But his true genius for asymmetrical warfare emerged when he broke away to form the PFLP External Operations, a splinter group dedicated solely to international terrorism, a franchise model for global revolution. He was the innovator. While other groups were planting bombs in marketplaces, Haddad was thinking on a global scale. He pioneered the tactic of aircraft hijacking as a form of political theater, a way to force the world's media to broadcast his cause. The report listed his operational triumphs like a corporate portfolio. September 1970, Dawson's Field. The simultaneous hijacking of 4 passenger jets, a Pan Am 747, a TWA 707, a Swissair DC-8, and an El Al 707, the last of which was foiled by an air marshal and a heroic pilot. Flown to a remote airstrip in Jordan and detonated in a coordinated spectacle in front of the world's press. It was a declaration that the conflict was no longer confined to the Middle East. It was global. May 1972, the Lod Airport Massacre. He recruited, trained, and armed 3 members of the Japanese Red Army, correctly calculating that Israeli security, focused on Arab threats, would never suspect non-Arabs. They opened fire with Czech Verzim 58 assault rifles in a crowded terminal, killing 26 civilians and wounding 80. He outsourced terror, creating a global network of radical affiliates. He worked with Germany's Baader-Meinhof gang, the Red Army faction, and the Venezuelan revolutionary known as Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, Carlos the Jackal, whom he personally mentored, funded, and unleashed on the West. Haddad was the CEO of Terror Inc., and his operational security was legendary. He never used a telephone, communicating only through trusted couriers and coded letters delivered via dead drops in European capitals. He never met in the same place twice. He never ate food he hadn't personally vetted or that wasn't prepared by his wife. He lived under the direct protection of Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime in Baghdad, a city where Mossad had no infrastructure, no assets, no reach. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. A ghost who had just successfully executed a plan that forced Israel to launch a military operation 4,000 kilometers from its borders. Hofi saw the writing on the wall. The next time, Haddad's reach might deliver a weapon to the heart of Tel Aviv itself. Phase 2. The Foundation. The second key player in this unfolding drama was the man reading the file, Yitzhak Hofi. A stark contrast to his target, Hofi was a product of the establishment, a man forged in the institutional fires of the state. Born in Tel Aviv, he had spent his entire life in uniform, a commander in the Palmach, the elite fighting force of the pre-state Jewish community, a general in the Israel Defense Forces, leading troops in the 1948 War of Independence, the Suez Crisis, the Six-Day War. His call sign in the army was Yitzhak, a sign of the ultimate respect. No one used a nickname. He was appointed director of Mossad in 1974, with a simple, brutal mandate from the government of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Restore the agency's credibility and its deterrent capability after the devastating intelligence failures of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Hofi was not a flamboyant spy master. He was a logistician, a strategist, a systems analyst. He believed in data, in process, in finding the single, exploitable flaw in an enemy's defenses. He looked at the Haddad problem not with rage, but as a complex equation that had, until now, been deemed unsolvable. The final piece of the leadership puzzle was the man Hofi would task with finding the solution, a figure whose involvement remains officially unconfirmed, but whose operational signature is all over the mission. Mir Dagan. Dagan was everything Hofi was not. He was the master of the unconventional, the specialist in wet work. Flashback: Jabalia refugee camp, Gaza Strip, 1971. The air was thick with the smells of charcoal, rotting fruit, and unwashed bodies. A young Major Mir Dagan, dressed as a Palestinian laborer in a dusty thob, pushed a wooden cart laden with bruised tomatoes through the teeming alleyway. His face was sun-darkened, his Arabic accent flawless, a product of his childhood. His two cousins followed, their hands never straying far from the pistols concealed beneath their robes. They were Mista Arvim, operators from his elite Ryman unit, undercover soldiers hunting terrorists. Their target was Ali Taha, a PFLP bomb maker responsible for a series of IED attacks on IDF patrols. The intelligence, extracted from an informant under duress, was specific. Taha would be at the Al Amal coffee house between noon and 1 o'clock, finalizing a payment for a shipment of Czech Semtex. Dagan spotted him through the throng, a man with a distinctive scar above his left eye, sipping tea. The plan was a silent takedown, a snatch and grab. But as they closed in, a boy, no older than 10, selling cigarettes from a tray, froze. His eyes widened. He had seen one of Dagan's men unmasked during a raid on his cousin's house a month before. The boy opened his mouth and screamed, "Yahud! Jews!" The alley exploded into chaos. Taha overturned his table, his chair clattering on the packed earth, and drew a Tokarev TT-33 pistol. Dagan didn't hesitate. He shoved his cart with the force of a linebacker into a group of men, creating a momentary barricade of bodies and produce, drew his own suppressed Beretta Model 70, and fired 2 rounds. The 22 LR rounds were subsonic, barely audible over the market's din. Taha dropped, a look of surprise on his face. But now the entire market was a hornet's nest. Men were reaching for hidden weapons. Dagan grabbed a live chicken from a nearby cage and hurled it into the face of an armed man lunging at him, the squawking bird providing a critical half-second of distraction. Dagan disarmed him with a brutal elbow strike to the throat that crushed his larynx. He barked orders in Arabic, not Hebrew. "Get the car. Go!" His team provided covering fire as they melted back into the labyrinthine alleys, using the chaos they had created as their shield. They were gone in 90 seconds, leaving behind a dead terrorist, a crushed tomato cart, and a wave of terror. Dagan was known for his motto, borrowed from the KGB. It is better to be feared than loved. He believed that the only way to fight an enemy like Haddad was to get inside his mind, to turn his own paranoia and precision against him. Dagan was the scalpel Hofi needed to excise the tumor of Wadi Haddad. But to reach a target in Baghdad, they needed an inside man. They needed an asset. That asset was a mid-level officer in the Iraqi Mukhabarat, the state intelligence service. Mossad's file on him was codenamed the Sadness. His recruitment had been a masterclass in psychological patience. It began 5 years earlier at an international telecommunications conference in Geneva. The Katsa, operating under the cover of a Belgian art dealer named Jean-Pierre, noticed him sitting alone at the hotel bar night after night, nursing a single whiskey. His face a mask of profound grief. Jean-Pierre approached not with an offer, but with empathy. He learned the man's story. His father, a celebrated professor of poetry at the University of Baghdad, had been dragged from his home during one of Saddam's political purges, accused of ideological corruption, tortured, and executed. For a full year, Jean-Pierre cultivated the relationship through quiet correspondence, discussing art, literature, and the shared pain of loss. He never mentioned politics or intelligence. He simply became a friend, a confessor. The turn came during a second meeting in Rome. Over a long dinner, the Iraqi finally broke down, his rage and helplessness pouring out. "They took everything from me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "And the man who signed the order? He dines with Saddam. He is untouchable." Jean-Pierre leaned forward. "Perhaps not," he said softly. "There are people who believe that such men should not be untouchable. People who can provide a measure of justice, not for a cause, not for a flag, but for your father." That was the hook. Not money, not ideology, but personal vengeance. The Sadness agreed. For years he provided low-level intelligence, bureaucratic details, shipping manifests, office gossip. He was a sleeper, a long-term investment. He was also, by sheer coincidence of his duties in the Foreign Ministry's liaison office, one of a handful of officials whose position allowed him to occasionally interact with the circle of couriers and facilitators who served as Haddad's lifeline to the outside world. He was the only potential access point. He was untested in high-stakes operations. He was terrified, and he was their only hope. The geopolitical chessboard of the mid-1970s was a minefield. The Cold War was at its peak. A KGB operation, codenamed Caucasus, was actively arming and training Palestinian factions in Lebanon. In 1975, a KGB counterintelligence sweep in Beirut, led by a notoriously thorough colonel from the First Chief Directorate, nearly exposed the Katsa handling the Sadness. A near miss during a dead drop at a bookstore forced the Katsa's emergency exfiltration and delayed the activation of the asset by 6 critical months. Simultaneously, the CIA, under its Project Ibex program, was deeply embedded in pre-revolution Iran. An attempt to resupply the Sadness with a new one-time pad via a courier crossing the Iran-Iraq border, had to be aborted at the last minute when a high-altitude CIA U-2 spy plane, deviating from its flight path over the Zagros Mountains, overflew the rendezvous point, its presence triggering a high alert among Iraqi border patrols. This complex environment made a new operation in Iraq, a Soviet client state, incredibly risky. Any misstep could be misinterpreted by Moscow or Washington, with catastrophic consequences. Haddad skillfully played the superpowers against each other. He received funding and training from the Soviet KGB at camps in Simferopol. He was given safe houses, forged documents, and logistical support by East Germany's Stasi. A series of escalating incidents throughout 1974 and 1975 demonstrated his global reach. December 1975. Carlos the Jackal, a Haddad protege, leads a team that storms the OPEC headquarters in Vienna, taking dozens of oil ministers hostage. The operation is a logistical masterpiece of terror, planned meticulously by Haddad from Baghdad. January 1976. A PFLP cell attempts to shoot down an El Al airliner at Orly Airport in Paris with a Soviet-made RPG-7 rocket launcher. The attempt fails, but it sends a shockwave through the aviation industry. Israel's traditional methods of response were ineffective. A military strike on Baghdad was a non-starter. A conventional intelligence operation was equally impossible. The problem was laid bare in a tense meeting in the Prime Minister's office. Yitzhak Rabin, and later his successor Menachem Begin, gave Hofi a clear directive. This wasn't about justice, it was about national survival. Intercepts suggested Haddad was actively trying to acquire chemical and biological agents through his Eastern Bloc contacts. He represented an evolution in terrorism, from a regional nuisance to a global menace capable of non-conventional attacks. The order was given to issue a red page on Wadi Haddad. In the lexicon of Mossad, a red page is a targeted assassination order, a formal classified document personally signed by the Prime Minister. It authorizes the agency to use any means necessary to eliminate the target. Hofi convened a special task force within Caesarea, Mossad's elite operations division. The team's sole purpose, designated by the Hebrew letter Tet, was to find a way to kill Wadi Haddad. For months, they hit a brick wall. The breakthrough came not from a high-tech satellite, but from a dusty, forgotten file. It was a report from a low-level surveillance operation conducted 5 years earlier on a PFLP safe house in Brussels. A Sion, a volunteer Jewish diaspora helper working as a cleaner, had been tasked with collecting trash from the apartment. Her reports were mundane for months, but an analyst in Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence Agency, cross-referencing keywords in a new data mining program, flagged one recurring detail. Every week, without fail, the Sion had found empty boxes of a very specific, very expensive brand of Belgian chocolate, Côte d'Or. The detail was logged as trivial, but now, in the desperate search for a vulnerability, the analyst linked it to a separate, more recent intelligence fragment from the debriefing of a captured PFLP fighter, who mentioned under interrogation that the master had a secret sweet tooth. Meir Dagan seized on this. It was perfect. It was personal. It bypassed all of Haddad's physical security and targeted him on a biological level. The plan was audacious. They would not plant a bomb in the chocolate. They would turn the chocolate itself into the weapon. A slow-acting, untraceable poison. It would be delivered not by a Mossad agent, but by a trusted associate, making it seem like a gift. It would kill him slowly, mimicking a natural disease, ensuring complete deniability. The mission was approved. Operation Chocolate was a go. Phase 3. The core. The first phase of the operation was not in the field, but in the laboratory. Mossad's technology division, Mifrats, was tasked with creating the weapon. The project was handed to Dr. Thorne's biochemical unit. They needed a toxin that was tasteless, odorless, lipid-soluble, and possessed a delayed, cumulative effect. The breakthrough came from a new, highly experimental field of research: weaponized lipid science. They synthesized a long-chain fatty acid molecule, a complex organic compound that was a potent cellular poison. The toxin, HLT7, was diabolical in its elegance. When ingested, it was absorbed into the bloodstream and, due to its lipid nature, was readily transported across cell membranes. It specifically targeted the mitochondria, the powerhouses of every cell. It didn't kill the cells directly. It interrupted the Krebs cycle by binding irreversibly to a key enzyme, coenzyme Q10, effectively starving the mitochondria of the electrons they needed for cellular respiration. The process was gradual, taking weeks or even months. The symptoms would be progressive and nonspecific: lethargy, severe weight loss, hair loss, skin lesions, and a catastrophic collapse of the immune system. It would look, to any physician, like a rare, aggressive form of leukemia or a severe autoimmune disorder. It was the perfect tool for a deniable assassination. The next challenge was weaponizing the delivery system. A Mossad team was dispatched to Brussels to buy every available box of Côte d'Or Boucher chocolates. In the lab, Thorne's team began a process of meticulous reverse engineering. They used gas chromatography to analyze the specific chemical composition of the glue used on the cardboard box. They used electron microscopy to study the paper fibers. They analyzed secretly filmed footage from the Côte d'Or factory to understand the precise heat and pressure settings of the machine that sealed the cellophane. Using custom-machined heated blades and specialized vacuum-applied adhesives, they learned to lift and reapply the cellophane without leaving a single wrinkle or microscopic stress mark. Simultaneously, another team worked on injecting the HLT7. Using custom-made, hair-thin borosilicate microsyringes, they could inject a precise, lethal dose, 500 micrograms, into the core of each chocolate without piercing the outer shell. The entry point, nearly invisible, was then sealed with a tiny drop of melted chocolate, color matched to the original. The result was a box of chocolates that was, in fact, a sophisticated biological weapon. While the scientists perfected the poison, the operations team focused on the field. Before activating the sadness, they needed fresh, real-time intelligence. A two-person Neviot reconnaissance team, posing as Dutch archaeologists studying Parthian-era pottery, was inserted into Baghdad. Their names were David and Tamar. Their mission was to conduct low-profile surveillance of the Mansour district and, more importantly, to establish their cover by making contact with a genuine and unwitting Iraqi academic at the National Museum. This was the most dangerous part of their insertion. The academic, a known Ba'ath Party loyalist, would either validate their credentials or report them. The meeting took place in the museum's dusty archives. Tamar, playing the role of the lead academic, engaged the professor in a detailed discussion of ceramic typologies from the Seleucid Empire. David, the assistant, took photographs, his camera's lens housing a high-resolution scanner that was digitizing every document on the professor's desk. The tension was unbearable. The professor grilled Tamar on obscure points of Akkadian history. She answered flawlessly, her cover story built on years of actual academic study. At the end of the meeting, the professor, satisfied, agreed to sponsor their research permit. As they left, Tamar saw him pick up the phone. For 3 hours, they waited in their apartment, ready to trigger their escape plan. Then the call came. Their permit was approved. Their cover was solid. They could begin their real work, watching Haddad's neighborhood. The technology underpinning the operation was a blend of cutting-edge science and old-school tradecraft. But technology fails. Deep within the foundational infrastructure of a government building adjacent to the Mansour district were a series of acoustic and seismic sensors, embedded years earlier by an Israeli agricultural tech company. These passive bugs, powered by piezoelectric crystals that converted ambient vibrations from water pipes and electrical mains into energy, monitored the unique acoustic signature of Haddad's motorcade. 3 days before the planned delivery, the data stream from the most critical sensor, designated Plato, went dead. In Tel Aviv, the mood was frantic. Without Plato, they couldn't confirm the courier's final approach to Haddad's villa. Aborting was not an option. The original engineer of the sensor system, a reclusive genius named Shimon, was pulled from his university post. Shimon explained that a power surge from the city grid had likely fried a relay, tripping the sensor into a permanent safe mode. A remote reboot was impossible. The relay had to be bypassed physically. This required placing a custom-built induction coil within 2 centimeters of the sensor's housing unit to transmit a reboot pulse. The housing unit was located in a locked utility sub-basement of the Ministry of Irrigation, a building crawling with Mukhabarat agents. David was tasked with the infiltration. His archaeologist cover gave him a pretext. He needed to access the ministry's archives to view old hydrological maps. Tamar created a diversion, staging a loud argument with a taxi driver outside the building's main entrance, drawing the attention of the guards. While they were distracted, David slipped into a service entrance. For 20 agonizing minutes, guided by Tamar's whispered instructions over a micro earpiece, he navigated the building's dark, labyrinthine basement. He found the utility room, picked the cheap lock, and located the sensor housing behind a wall of conduit pipes. He attached the induction coil, a small black donut of a device. "Transmit pulse," he whispered. In Tel Aviv, the team watched a flat line on their monitor. Nothing. "It's not working," a tech shouted. Shimon, his voice strained over the comms, said, "The surge must have depolarized the core. He needs to create a percussive shock to reseat it. Tell him to hit the conduit pipe hard." David, wedged in the cramped space, took a deep breath and slammed the heel of his boot into the pipe. The clang echoed through the basement. On the screen in Tel Aviv, a green light blinked. A data stream appeared. Plato was back online. Then came the first major operational setback. The target for the handoff, Haddad's most trusted courier, Abu Wissam, was arrested at the airport in Athens by Greek authorities acting on a tip from German intelligence regarding an unrelated arms smuggling case. He was out of the picture. Haddad immediately appointed a new courier, a younger, more aggressive operative known only as the Wolf. Mossad's file on him was dangerously thin. He was known for his ruthlessness and his sharp counter-surveillance instincts. Dagan argued to proceed, theorizing that the new courier's eagerness to prove himself would make him less cautious. Others on the committee argued the risk was too great. The Wolf was an unknown variable who might spot the handoff as a setup. The risk was immense, but the mission continued. The second setback was an act of God. On the day the diplomatic pouch containing the chocolates was scheduled to fly from Amman to Baghdad, a massive sandstorm swept across the desert. Baghdad International Airport was closed. The box of chocolates was stuck on the tarmac in Amman. For Dr. Thorne's science team, this was a biochemical crisis. HLT-7 had a limited shelf life. Its complex molecular structure, engineered for stealth, was inherently unstable and began to break down after 72 hours at room temperature. The unexpected delay was eating into that window. Frantic calculations were made. After 36 agonizing hours, the storm cleared. The toxin's potency was now borderline, but still within the calculated lethal range. Thorne gave a grim assessment. It will still kill him, but it may take longer. The symptomology might be less predictable. Just as the flight was rescheduled, the third and most dangerous complication materialized. A ghost appeared. From a public telephone in Baghdad, a Priority 1 alert was triggered at the Israeli embassy in Paris. The caller used an old deep-cover duress code known to only a handful of veteran case officers. The asset was codenamed Sparrow, a high-level source within the Syrian military who had been presumed captured and executed by Syrian intelligence 2 years prior. He had somehow escaped, made his way to Baghdad, and was now on the run, hunted by both Syrian and Iraqi agents. He had vital, time-sensitive intelligence about a planned Syrian missile attack on the Golan Heights. His call from a public phone in Baghdad triggered a massive electronic and human intelligence sweep by the Mukhabarat, who had detected the unauthorized international connection. The entire city was becoming a trap. Sparrow's presence threatened to compromise everything. A citywide lockdown would make the chocolate handoff impossible and could easily sweep up the Sadness or the Nevaot team in its dragnet. A bitter argument erupted in the Tel Aviv command center. Hofi, the pragmatist, was stone-faced. We cut him loose. The strategic priority is Haddad. We cannot risk a multi-year operation and the lives of 3 officers on the ground for 1 man, no matter how valuable his intelligence. Duggan slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with anger. We do not leave our people behind. Not ever. Sparrow risked his life for us for a decade. He gave us the intel that prevented the '73 war from being even worse. We throw him to the dogs now? What message does that send to every asset we have in the field? That their lives are disposable. The message, Hofi retorted, his voice dangerously quiet, is that the mission comes first. Haddad is a strategic threat. Sparrow is a tactical asset whose time has passed. It is a simple, brutal calculation. The debate raged for an hour before Duggan, pacing like a caged